Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today here on TIP International Radio. I'm your host, Leah Maston. We are showcasing prestigious top professionals from all industries all over the globe to share their experience and stories of success. We have a very special guest joining us today who has dedicated close to 3 decades of professional experience to the healthcare industry. He just recently has been promoted by Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine to professor from an associate professor in medicine and as a radiation oncologist. He is the program director of the Radiation Oncology Residency Program with Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. He is an international award winning physician, author, and contributor to multiple articles and scientific journals. Has worked with the American Medical Association and has served on various committee and health boards. Everyone, please welcome Dr. Alan Hartford. Hi, Dr. Hartford. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's an honor having you on the show. Dr. Hartford, you have dedicated 30 years of your life to medicine and oncology. Tell me, what first got you started in this field? Was healthcare always something you were interested in?
Well, that's a very, very long explanation. I'll try not to get too too long-winded. Uh, there are three parts to it, really. I mean, how I ended up where I am today it has to do with first getting interested in medicine, and then secondly in oncology, in the study of cancer, and then radiation oncology, which is what I do on a day-by-day basis. And how people choose their professions is a very complicated proposition. For me, when I was in college, I loved everything, and I loved science, and I loved the arts, and I loved to write. My father was a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor, and the Hartford cycled very slowly. So, my dad was born in 1918, and his father was born in, I think it was 1865 or something like that. So I still had my grandfather's little black bag. But during college, I loved science, and I really thought the idea of taking science and making it work and working for people, helping people, would be something which would be incredibly deeply gratifying. So that's what pulled me into medicine in the first place. And then in medical school, I was also very much interested in public service and public policy. So I got involved in doing a PhD, and that in political economy and government. So I spent some time actually doing work in the policy world. And that was one way that I got involved in organized medicine, the American Medical Association, and other organizations, and doing some consulting work and other things. While I was in medical school, sadly, my mother died, and she had cancer, and that was very hard. And my grandmother then also passed away from cancer, and I knew what it was like to be a, a patient, and what it was like to be a family member of a patient. So as I started thinking about what I wanted to do in medicine and how I wanted to spend my time in my career, I thought, I'd love to be able to take my own experiences and try to make those helpful to other people. So, taking care of cancer patients seemed to me a very important thing to do, a very real thing to do. I love the idea of taking medicine and using it to help people in their lives as a whole. My dad was an ophthalmologist, and that was a beautiful thing to do. And many doctors focus very much on one body part or on one particular issue, but the challenge of being a cancer doctor is that you really take care of the whole person, and it's not just necessarily taking care of the tumor, but you help them deal with quality of life issues and family issues and relationships and everything else. So that pulled me into that world, and uh, I was always a brainy little kid, kind of a nerd, and I loved computers and math and physics. And this particular world of radiation oncology lets you do physics and math and computer science all day long, and you take care of people who are having a lot of trouble, dealing with these really tough issues, and sometimes you actually get to fix them in the process. So high tech the high tech part of radiation oncology really spoke to me, and it's high touch. It's very, very personal, and you help people in their lives and their families, and that seemed to me a great mix. So that's how I wandered into medicine and eventually wandered into radiation oncology.
Well, it sounds like it's definitely in your wheelhouse. Um, on top of everything that you do, you have such an impressive repertoire of prior roles, including working with the American Medical Association, the Commission on Cancer of the American College of Surgeons, and the NRG Oncology Clinical Trials Group, just to name a few. Tell us about your experiences there and why it is so important for you to stay involved with these organizations.
Well, very that's a very rich and a deep question. So, like as I alluded to, what drew me into early work with the American Medical Association was my interest in health policy. And, that dovetails very closely with the issue of public service. The AMA is this very large umbrella organization for all of organized medicine and is crucial for American society. And patients may not realize it, but, work in organized medicine is incredibly important for people, everyone. So, that's what drew me into it in the first place, and I get a little teary almost. I find it very important, but so it's a form of public service, and there's so many different aspects to it. So I worked in the AMA as an umbrella group while I was a medical student and as a resident, and then you find that there are particular issues or particular things which are one can speak with a degree of authority and knowledge. And my knowledge base over time has, kind of focused primarily in this world of radiation and cancer care and taking care of patients in those contexts. So that public service role translated into work in particular organizations within organized medicine. Um, and that especially as applied to research and education and quality standards. So on the research end, you can't really do cancer care based on yesterday. You have to do cancer care based on today's knowledge base and then build into the future. So you're always looking ahead. And the science of yeah, our science, both on the technological side and the biological side, is growing by leaps and bounds every day. So it's very exciting. And you can't take what we learn in the laboratory and then just apply it. You have to figure out how, what, where things are most beneficial to people. That involves doing clinical trials. So working kind of that during residency and then starting as a faculty member, I got very much involved in doing clinical trials research. And you can't do that in a bubble. You have to do that with large scale groups because these questions involve very specific cancers with very specific um, needs and therapies. And so, one institution, for example, where I work here at Dartmouth, we may see a particular kind of cancer. We may only see a couple of dozen cases of that a year. But if you want to answer the question, you may need a database of several hundred or even 1,000. So to do that, you have to work with other groups. And so very early on, I got involved in the what was called the RTOG, which is now called Energy Oncology, which is a large scale uh, cancer research organization where different doctors from all these different universities, medical schools, hospitals around the country and actually around the world, it involves Canada, also has some sites in Europe and Japan and Israel. And this enables patients to enroll in clinical trials, which is very important for them because it gives them new options. And it's very important for their children and for us who practice to be able to learn what's new and what works. So that's what got me involved in energy oncology. And that actually is an offshoot of the American College of Radiology. And the ACR is also a very large umbrella organization. And within it sits diagnostic radiology, radiation oncology, different kinds of radiology groups. And they're very much involved in that research arm, but then also education and also very much in quality standards. The ACR is very much involved in developing professional quality standards, which are very important, again, for patients because you want to make sure that you're practicing at the very top level. and setting standards, getting, again, and it's a collaborative thing. It's not you tell people what to do. You don't say to doctors, you have to do it this way. You get the doctors together and make sure everyone is, participating in a very active and positive and proactive way to do the very, very best possible. So the ACR, American College of Radiology, very much involved in doing that. And then on the educational end, that quite often can be very much specialty specific. So for radiation oncology, that organization is called ASPRO, the American Society for Radiation Oncology, and also within a larger umbrella, kind of within the ACR, the Radiological Society of North America, the RSNA. And these groups, again, very much involved in doing education, putting together courses, conferences, and trying to make sure that, again, we have an opportunity to share knowledge. Because, academic medicine, academics is, this kind of marriage between doing the very best that we currently know how to do, so setting that quality standard, but at the same time, then building on top of that for the future, which is research, and then also making sure that the knowledge that you develop and that you hold is also disseminated to the next generation, which is education. So all these different parts, and there are all these different parts of organized medicine which kind of make that work. So yeah, that's kind of how I got involved in that and the different organizations and what they do. And I think it's a very important part of being a good doctor. So yeah, that's what got me going.
Well, I can tell you're very passionate about the work you're doing and your involvement with your organizations. Um, what do you think has been your biggest obstacle that you've had to face, whether in your current position or prior to your position, in order to pursue your goals?
Well, I think you were very kind to send me these questions in advance so I could think about them. I think the greatest obstacle generally that I have, and then almost anybody has in doing anything, are internal issues. Um, so the two obstacles which I think that I've always had to deal with, and I think which probably all of us have to deal with as we're trying to accomplish anything, there are two parts to it. One is insecurity, the fear that, we're going to just fall flat on our face and then you don't try. And the other half of it is pride, or kind of focus on oneself. And then the idea that I got to do this because, I need to, have this, succeed, as though it somehow has something to do with me. Um, to work well with other people, you have to kind of step away from yourself and say, I care about the goal.
Mhm.
And then you work with other people towards the goal. And you never say never. And, then if it works, it works. And if it didn't, then you tried and you go on to the next project.
Throughout your illustrious career, you have won numerous awards, honors, and have been featured in magazines and publications. Last year, you appeared on the famous billboard in Times Square, and you graced the front cover of Tip magazine. This year, you will be honored at IAOTP's annual awards gala in New York City as top Doctor of the Year, and also receiving the IAOTP Lifetime Achievement Award. Congratulations. It's very impressive and so deserving. What would you say has been the highlight of your career or the most memorable experience that you've had to date?
Well, yeah, so I thank you. First off, the whole thing, I mean, the list that you just read off is really kind of crazy, I think, but um, there are many, many, many people more deserving than me. So I think in terms of awards, I mean, kind of, I think I have to talk about them in different categories. Kind of, I maybe in three. Just think about them in three sets. Kind of in terms of public acknowledgement, I would have to say that who could argue with having your face on a billboard in Times Square? That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
just crazy.
And the
So
picture, turn to the right just for a second so people can see the picture right behind you. Right there.
yeah,
There
yeah.
it is.
So there it is. So uh, well, Andy Warhol, I think, said everybody gets 15 minutes of fame, right? So I think
Right.
those are my 15 minutes anyway. So very, very appreciated and incredibly humbling. Um, in terms of achievements, and acknowledgments, on the professional side, I think maybe the greatest thing I would point to would be the development of our residency program here at Dartmouth. The audience may or may not know. In medicine, to become a doctor, you go through different stages. So, one stage, you go through college and you get into medical school and you go through medical school. And at the end of medical school, you then have to decide what specialty, you can't do everything. Are you going to be a surgeon or a dermatologist or an ophthalmologist or an oncologist or what? So that then involves picking a field and doing a residency. And then the residency takes that medical student over a period of years and makes sure that they are ready to go out there and practice in the real world. And then at the end of the residency, they graduate, there are a bunch of exams, and they go out and hang up a shingle, so to speak. That's a multi-year, very complicated process that involves clinical teaching and lectures and exams and learning how to do various procedures, working in the operating room. So, and there are only a limited number of residencies out there. Now, Dartmouth never had a residency in radiation oncology. In the Northeast, only Harvard, Brown, and Yale had residencies. So, nationally, there might be, I think, 100, give or take. So we were always missing, and Dartmouth is a very fine medical school. It's one of the oldest medical schools in the United States, and has a very long illustrious tradition of teaching at a very high level. So it really should have a residency in radiation oncology. And for a time, I was working as section chief for our group. And one thing that we'd been talking about for 10 years was getting a residency program. And I mean, I know that people before that had been something we talked about for forever. So we made that a major project, and it took several years, and it involves applying through multiple tiers of organizations. And the actual application eventually becomes this several hundred-page document. It's about yay thick. And then that goes through different committees, and then they come and they visit and they kick the tires, and then they make recommendations, and then you have to go back and you have to do another filing, and then they come out, they kick the tires some more, and then eventually, finally, you start it. So we did finally get our residency going uh, uh, 2 years ago. We had our first cycle of residents applying. And this past year, we have our first resident. Now, that may sound incredibly anticlimactic. You do all this work, all this work, all this work for so many years. We now have one resident. So, and no pressure on him, but if he
Yeah,
screws up,
none. Yeah.
he's in big trouble.
Yeah, all for nothing.
No. He's excellent. He's absolutely excellent. And,
Yeah.
he came in understanding that this was going to. He's a very brave soul and
He's the
very
guinea pig.
excellent. He's incredibly competent. So you're very proud of him, actually.
Wonderful.
So he's breaking this new ground, and then we're going to have another one joining us actually in July. That's going to be number 2, and then number 3 the following year, and eventually it's a 4-year program, so eventually we'll have 4. And again, that may sound like it's incredibly small and not a big deal, but it is very rare to actually start a residency, if you can tell from the numbers, and especially to have the honor to do it at an Ivy League. And here we are. We're the fourth program in New England. So again, I got a little choked up because it was excuse me, an enormous amount of work.
Wow.
But very exciting, and so far so good. Everything's working okay. So we're very honored to actually be able to do this. And it's not me. This huge group who've been working on this for a very long time. The other faculty members, and then our resident who's coming in, then the others who are following behind him. So uh, yeah, so I'm very proud of the whole thing, very proud of them, and it's a legacy. So hopefully 20 years from now, we'll have a little pool of successful radiation oncologists out there taking care of cancer patients around the country.
Yeah.
And every year they'll come back and have a little meeting and they'll get together and we'll say this is what we did.
That is incredible and a massive, massive accomplishment.
So that was on a professional level, and on a personal level, again, I can't take personal credit. This is if it weren't for God and God working in my life, I wouldn't be able to accomplish much of anything. Um, so that's that. So he gets the credit, and in that, my greatest blessing in terms of not an accomplishment would be my daughter, um, who is the greatest blessing in my life. So mm, those things are incredibly personally important and real, and every professional success um, only counts as much as you know I, as a person as a whole, reflect back to my creator and also to my own family and those whom I love. So um, yeah, so I think those are my major accomplishments, or the greatest in my life, at least.
Right.
And I thank God every day.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's beautiful and so personal. Amazing accomplishments. And you have such a wealth of experience in all that you've been involved with. What would be some advice you would give to someone starting out in your industry?
Oh, well, my industry is so big. Probably my advice is worth as much to anybody as to anybody going into medicine, or my I don't know if it's healthcare or education or what.
Yeah.
So my general advice for anyone setting out in a professional career of any kind is the most important thing is commitment. And there are, I think, three things one really needs to be committed to. One is integrity, truth. Um, it's very easy along the way for to be tempted to compromise, to cut corners. No one will ever know, so we can do it like this. Um, you'll know.
Yeah.
So that's very important. So that at the end of the day, you look back on the day and you say, that was I did a good job today. And you never can get to 100%. So you got to cut yourself some slack and say, well, I did my best, and tomorrow's the new day.
Yeah.
So there's that integrity, and that's very closely aligned to the second bit of commitment you have to have, which is that you need to be committed to excellence. You don't want to do things just good enough. You want to do them as well as is possible. And thirdly, that comes with, of course, the realization that me, no one is perfect, and there's always room for personal growth. And so every day, look for ways to grow and look for ways to, shine a little bit brighter in your personal life, and then also in your relationships, and so make the relationships important. And, without those, everything else just doesn't count. So commitment, integrity, excellence, and growth.
I love that advice. Aside from your successful career, you are also a writer under the pen name Ellen Froning and contributor to multiple articles and journals. Tell us about that.
Oh, those are two very separate lives. So the articles and the journals are just part of my professional career.
Yeah.
And you can't do research without writing about it. I mean, otherwise, no one knows what you're doing. That's crazy. The novel uh, and the pen name are a little bit of a complicated story. I, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, I did a PhD in political economy and government, and and what I eventually wrote about, what I got involved in, um, was really a little bit of biomedical ethics, looking at how money in industry could impact the way researchers conduct science.
Mhm.
And that was kind of a somewhat controversial topic, but fun and interesting. And so I wrote my dissertation, which was well over 200 pages long, and finished it. But I was then already in my residency and at Mass General and working hard, and that was kind of all consuming. And then I came out and they hired me, and then I was like working doing that, and that dissertation just sat on the shelf and just sat there. And it would look at me and reproach me in the evenings and just say, "You're not doing anything with all this work you did." And then I was hired by Dartmouth, and I came up here, and I then still had that crazy dissertation staring at me. And my friends who lived in very urban environments in New York City and Washington, D.C., and San Francisco, all these people I'd known through school over the years, and they would call me and they say, "Hartford, what are you doing?" And at that point, lived in this very beautiful little log cabin, which was tucked away in the woods. And it was actually at the end of this dirt road. And I would tell them, "Well, here I am at Dartmouth and I'm working, and having a wonderful time working in my radiation oncology." And they say, "Well, what's your personal life like?" And I say, "Well, I'm living in this cabin in this at the end of a dirt road in the middle of the woods." And they say, "Well, what the heck are you doing there?" And I blurted out, "I'm writing a novel," which seemed to me a perfectly fine thing to do when you're in a log cabin.
Right. I mean, what else are you going to be
Right.
doing?
So and I had actually always intended to write a novel, and
Yeah.
I had the dissertation, which I always felt I needed to do something about. And in the course of my studies and interviewing people, and I had talked to folks in biotech and pharmaceutical research and healthcare industry research and all kinds of things, and I had a head full of stories of all kinds of crazy stuff. And the world is a very complicated place. Basically, if you can imagine it, it's out there. So I thought, well, I should take what I've learned from my dissertation and turn it into a book. And I seem to, and somebody would said to me, every human being has at least one novel in them. So I thought it'll take me a year. So I started working on it. It actually took 4 years. And in the process, I wrote almost 200,000 words. And that is a crazy amount. That's about War and Peace. And then I thought, I can't get this published. And then it took me another several years and edited down to, fighting weight, about 110,000, and then finally got it published. And, it's not as though it's been a barn burner of a book. But folks who read it like it. And I work under a pen name because I don't want my patients to look me up and say, "Oh, geez, this guy is like not a serious doctor. He's really a novelist." So that's why it's under my pen name. It's also in honor of my mom. Froning was my mother's maiden name. So I just figured, she would have appreciated the book had she had the capacity, had the chance to read it. So it's a fun book. It's actually it has a serious theme behind it, which I think is kind of a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. And it's really about the integrity of science and about the fact that science is a very, very human endeavor. Scientists are people, and they have tons of challenges. And I think just looking at what's happened with COVID in the last year or so, and some of the crazy politics, and which have kind of pushed scientists in one direction or another. It's just one little example of the fact that human beings are struggling their very best every day to do the right thing, and there are all these different pressures that they face. So the book is about a young neurosurgeon who ends up working in a laboratory, which turns out to be run by the mob, and they are creating this a blockbuster pharmaceutical, which is supposed to be the cure for brain cancer. And he discovers that they're faking the data. They discover that he's discovered that they're faking the data. He disappears. The FBI and the NSA then start trying to find him, aided by his girlfriend, who's a lawyer in New York, who ends up having, not realizing, and also having connections with these mobsters. And it gets very complicated, and there's a biker gang, and eventually a couple of explosions, and our hero ends up on the island of Bermuda. And I won't say anything more about that. but it's a fun book. And most people read it, and I don't think they really come to grips with the fact that somebody who's serious about science actually wrote it. But it's all there.
Oh, I love it. Aside from being a writer, do you have time for any other hobbies? What else do you like to do for fun?
Well, this sounds kind of crazy, but one of my colleagues just lately called me Tom Sawyer. And I guess her point was that, with Tom Sawyer with whitewashing the fence, it's fun. Work is fun. So, which it is.
Yeah.
So there is that. So, and actually, I like using different parts of my brain for different things. So, there's science, there's working with people, there's developing educational materials, there's going out doing conferences and lectures. All of these different things involve kind of different parts. So you get tired doing one thing, then you do something else for a while. So there's that there. And also writing for me is not work at all. It's fun. So there's now another book which I'm trying to develop because. The character in the first book, his name's August, Steve August, and the actual title of the book, essentially, I should have done a little bit more of a promo of it, I guess, is The First Days of August.
Okay.
So the first days of August does not refer to the calendar, it refers to Steve August. And of course, at the end of the book, then we're waiting for the next iteration of what may happen with poor Steve. So uh, there's that as a bit of fun for me. Is
So,
always
so
trying
is
to kind
Steve
of
left? Is
pardon.
Steve left? Is Steve left on a cliffhanger then?
Well, it's yeah, kind of. So what's happened at the end of the book is you're not really sure whether Steve's dead.
Oh,
And for fun, I friends of mine when they've read the book, I would say, so is Steve alive or dead?
okay.
And it's interesting. It's about a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
And of course, if he's dead, there's no sequel.
Right,
So
right.
he's got to be alive.
Yeah.
And the question is, how's this all playing out? But it's complicated. So anyway, but bottom line is, I'll give it away. Steve is
Yeah.
alive,
Yeah.
and
Don't say anything else.
that's all you need to know. And you're actually anybody who really thinks about the last chapter will say, "Oh, of course he's alive."
Yeah.
But that requires really kind of digging into trying to read my mind. I love reading, so I also teach here at the medical school, of course, on reading novels, and the purpose of that, actually, the subterranean purpose of that is to teach empathy. So there are actually studies out that show that people who read novels, good literature, develop a better understanding of other people and are better at doing empathic thinking. And that's a really important thing for doctors to do. So for the past 5 years, I've had a little course with the medical students that actually reads novels, and we talk about them. And in the course of that, they actually kind of exercise empathic thinking. Uh, the um, but that's for me fun. So how do you say is that work? Is that fun? That's fun. I love to play piano. I've been a jazz pianist now for decades. I used to play at a couple of little restaurants around here. But, but that's something I've always really, really, really enjoyed. For me, the piano is a great passion. So it's a normal thing for me, early on a Saturday morning to get up and play around a little bit before starting my day. Things like yeah, and I like talking to people. I like hanging out, doing nothing. All
But
of the
considering
above.
how much you do all the time, I would assume that's just very pleasurable. Just nothing for a minute.
I recommend it highly.
Yeah, yeah. Looking back, what would you say that you attribute your success to?
Yeah, well, I think I kind of already answered that in a way.
Yeah.
It's just the day I start talking about my success is the day that I lose my success. So it's my relationship to God inspires what I do, and that is fundamental. So trust in God, number one, and then loving other people. If you don't care for other people, you'll never get anywhere. If that's what you really care about, every day is a new day, every day is a glorious day, and the details sort themselves out. Where you turn your passions, they will reap benefit, and there will come back manyfold, anything that you sow. So trust in God and loving other people, those two things.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Hartford. We are so honored to have you on the show. You are so inspiring, and it's just been such an honor.
It's been a great privilege for me to be on the show. Leah, thank you so much. I think IAOTP and all you folks for making this possible. So thank you. God bless you.
And for more information on Dr. Hartford, you can visit IAOTP.com and see his video biography on YouTube.